God, you sound terrible.
I know. Thanks for reminding me.
Full of
Um,
cold, full of cold.
I know, I know. Hey team, welcome to as you all know. So first and foremost, I've got a flu, so I absolutely sound terrible. So forgive me if I'm hard to understand, or I'm talking too fast, or just can't understand me. But I'll have a go anyway. Okay, good news is we're live. This is the eighth webinar in our Strivers Job Seeker series. We've pulled together 11 webinars, group coaching, as well as one-to-one sessions every Friday morning. For anyone that's recently, had their role affected by redundancies, or you're currently looking for a job right now, in job searching. What we'll do, we'll also pop the link to all the events in the chat after you finish, after Shaun's finished speaking. Just want to say a really big thank you to everyone that's volunteered their time to help pull all this together. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and we couldn't do it we couldn't do it without all of you. That includes the wonderful Shaun Steves from Orca Search. Shaun is the co-founder of Orca. He's going to be talking to us today about where are the jobs and how do you start your job hunt. Shaun's going to talk about 25 minutes, and then we'll head into a Q&A. Any questions or comments as we go, please pop them in the chat, and we'll get to them afterwards. We're probably going to try and break it up, so feel free. Shaun will discuss a topic, and depending on how many questions are, we might break up the questions in regards to that topic and move on to the next. Or if there's not so many questions, we can wait towards the end and then just ask all the questions there. So I'll see how that goes. Last thing for me, we'll be recording this session, so we'll share the recording with everyone afterwards. Other than that, my terrible voice, I'll let you go over to Shaun, who sounds a lot better than me today. Shaun, over to you.
Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate it. I have to say, first and foremost, this is my first time of doing a webinar without being able to see all people's faces down the side of a screen and get any feedback or anything. So apologies. This is my first time doing this. I'm a little bit nervous. If I get it wrong, just bear with me. So as Nathan suggested, I'm Shaun Stevens, and I am one of the co-founders of Orca Search. Orca Search is a business that was set up approximately 2 years ago. We're a startup in the recruitment space. Reese and I, my business partner, we had 10 plus years experience working for a couple of larger organizations across the UK and Australia, and then felt like we'd built up enough of a network and done hopefully good enough things by people that we could confidently go and set up our own business and try and sort of forge our own paths in the world, which we've done. As I'm sure there'll be people on here that have maybe run a business before or tried it, it's all fun and games. It's definitely champagne and razor blades, but it's been fun so far. So the team at Striving asked me to talk to you today about a handful of topics around people that have maybe been impacted by job losses over the last 6 or 9 months ago, and perhaps where they can search and what they can do in order to try and find their next role. So hopefully in this session today, I'll be able to give you some practical tips. There'll be lots of things that I'm sure that you're already aware of. There'll be things that you're probably already doing, but potentially there's 1 or 2 nuggets here that we can look at, discuss, and obviously ask any questions on about how you might be able to best position yourself to try and find the next thing. So here we are. I'm going to share my screen. Just bear with me 1 moment so that you can see my presentation. Just bear with me a second. And here we go. Oh, and present. Nathan, perhaps you can give me a little bit of feedback on whether that's up and you can see.
Also, you can hear me. I can see that. Guys, I was just saying, can everyone just, we're using StreamYard, first time I've used it. Can anyone just sort of just comment and let us know if you can see the presentation? But I can see it. Hang on, add to stream. There we go. I just had to add it to stream, so that's fine now.
Great.
It's fine. Wherever for sure. Yep, perfect. Everyone else see that? I think that's okay now. Pretty sure you can see that.
Yeah, excellent, fantastic. Yep. I'm just going to go back to present mode. Excellent, very good. Okay, great. So look, the first bit that I would say, the first topic we're going to discuss is centered around what industries are hiring. And I think that the first thing about this that I think is really important is that there's obviously been over the last 6 to 9 months, clearly some lots of stuff in the news around which industries aren't hiring or perhaps letting people go, and there might be people on this webinar that have actually experienced that through being made redundant. Obviously the tech sector has been pretty brutal in that regard, but what I would say is that just because one sector has, quite obviously been making a lot of people redundant, that doesn't mean that there's not lots of other areas of the market that are hiring and are looking for good people. What I would probably say, though, around which industries are hiring is that there's probably not just a rule of thumb of it's this industry or this industry. I think that there's definitely some themes that you can look at that would be, I guess, relatively obvious at the moment, of sectors that are going through significant change. So if you look at anything that's related to the whole energy transition at the moment, and the people that play different parts in that value chain, there's lots of disruption in the energy space. I think there's always going to be lots of change going on across things like food production, agriculture, infrastructure, that are all going to be impacted, but also that breeds opportunity for people to be able to then hire new people and new people into the sector. So I think for me, the big thing that I could give you advice on is around research. So there is lots of information out there. All you have to do is go and find it. So for me, as an example, as a business owner, I'm looking for new clients and new opportunities to win business. And in that regard, I will often be reading the news, reading things like the AFR, keeping abreast of what I'm seeing across LinkedIn, to try and see if there's any themes or anything that's going on in particular sectors or particular industries that I can then spot, and then potentially go and look at connecting with people in those particular areas. So very similarly to someone's job search, I think that there's lots of information out there that you can garner just by doing some research to get a bit of an idea about who might be hiring. So that first point around looking for areas of the market that are going through significant disruption or change, you've got the higher level themes of particular sectors, but even within sectors, you'll find that there are businesses that are doing things that could potentially align to your skill set. So there's always going to be businesses that are being sold, businesses that are being bought, businesses that might be going through regulatory change, businesses that might be going through other areas of sort of large scale transformation. And I think that doing your research and getting in the traffic to understand where those sectors are, where those businesses might be, can come down to just doing some basic research. I think I've just put government on there as a point. I know the government roles aren't for everybody, but I think that there's two parts to the government point. One is that if you're keeping across what's happening within government, that can also give you a really good indicator as to where investment is being made, and therefore where industries who have getting this investment might then be looking to increase their workforce. And on the flip side of it, government jobs, whilst they're not for everybody, typically are not cyclical and sort of relatively recession proof. So it is a sector that I would say, if it is of interest to you, or you're open to that, that's always a sector to try and maybe have a look at. It's obviously one of the biggest employers across Australia, if not the biggest. Industry news and wins. So this goes back to sort of a similar theme to disruption and change. Keeping yourself abreast of the news that's happening in the market, and certain, when I say wins, it could be around businesses growing, businesses getting funding. Try and maybe see if you can get yourself connected to certain newsletters or subscriptions that maybe are more focused or targeted on particular sectors that you might be interested in. As an example, the VC space is one that has been quite affected by the tech industry, but they are actually quite diversified across different areas that they might be investing in. So even subscribing to certain VC, startup, scale up type newsletters and events, these sort of things can give you a good insight into what's actually going on in the market. And then, the other thing that research might do, it might give you some insights into other themes that are happening at the moment, whether that is across particular sectors, particular sized of businesses, the disruption that's happening maybe because of technology, and what businesses might need to do across that. And I'll give you an example. Other themes might be something like, we've seen big security breaches or data privacy breaches over the last year or so around businesses like Optus and Medibank. Now, those businesses are just a handful of businesses that have been really affected, but that is another theme across data and technology that is something that clearly more and more businesses are going to have to think about, and that's cross-sector, and that's pretty much all types of businesses where they might be storing customer data. So that's a theme that you could be researching and looking at that would then mean that people are likely to be actually needing to invest in more people to help them through this particular journey, transformation, project, etc. From there, you also want to reflect on, well, how do you match that with your skills, which we'll come on to down the line. But clearly, if you've had 20 years experience in, ASX top 10 organizations and you want to go into the scale up world, you might find that might be a bit of a stretch unless you sort of really reflect on how your skills could translate over to those types of industries. So just an example, but really reflecting on, do your skills match the organizations, whether that be size or sector, that you are potentially targeting. So I'll just pause there for a moment. Nathan, if there's any questions, I can't see you because I'm presenting. So if there's any questions or anything you want to dive into there before we move on to the next thing, I'll just pause for a moment to answer anything.
Yeah, no worries. Really, really insightful, Shaun, and thanks for a good overview there. Before I ask any questions, I've only got one or two, but I'd love to hand the mic over to anyone else, obviously watching and, going through the session with us. So, yeah, please, guys, reach out for any questions that Shaun can answer, based on the topic on where the jobs are, because Shaun's sort of breaking it up into 2 or 3 sections. So I'll just leave it for 10 or 15 seconds short, what do you call it?
Yep.
Awkward delay
Yep.
to see if there's any questions. And if not, I'll ask mine.
Sounds good.
Come on, there must be 1 or 2 questions, everyone. All right, cool. Looks like everyone might be, I guess, in terms of, obviously it sounds like you're well versed and gave away a lot of information, which is fantastic.
Yep.
So it's probably not too many questions there. But I guess one thing I will say, you've obviously sort of mentioned a lot of jobs and in government and whatnot. One question I have is what is your sort of favorite go-to resource for finding government jobs? So, obviously, we know that, for example, startups, you might jump into a VC such as Airtree or Blackbird or something like that, and they've generally got a job board for all their portfolio companies. You can generally find hundreds of jobs there.
Yeah.
But from a government perspective, I'm pretty certain that they also have a similar sort of job board as opposed to your traditional Seek. So what's your sort of go-to resource for looking for government jobs?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So you'll find that the leadership level roles will always be advertised on Seek and LinkedIn for government, but actually they do have their own portals where, as an individual, you can kind of create a profile about the types of things that you're good at, where your skills are, and the types of things you'd be interested in hearing more about. So one portal that we use from an agency perspective is by ICT. Now I know that sounds very tech focused, but it's actually sort of just a platform, a digital platform that the federal government have created to be able to put a lot of their work out there. And it doesn't just cover technology; it covers a broader range of things than that. So there's stuff like that out there, which the government have done a really, really good job in actually kind of digitizing the whole, looking for jobs process. So you can create yourself a portal on there. And I think there's 1 or 2 others which I can maybe put into the conversation afterwards, where you could, similar to that the government have created, that has a lot of those jobs on there.
Fantastic. No, awesome. Thank you. And another quick question, this one may be a little bit more far-fetched, but obviously a lot of startups are now running programs where people are trying to break into tech or break into startups. Coming from corporate startups, are you aware of any initiatives where people are trying to go from corporate or startups are trying to break into government, if there's any opportunities in that sort of wheelhouse?
Yeah, good, interesting question. You've probably stumped me a little bit there, Nathan, because no, I'm not aware of anything that I could probably share. I'd have to reflect on that and then probably come back to you.
No worries. Awesome. Thanks. All right, cool.
Sure.
If there's no other questions, let's move into the second topic.
Yeah. So this is always a challenge for people, and I completely understand why it might be. So, where do I start looking? Where are the jobs? I think that, working and trying to do a job search is like, two different things on its own, and it sort of feels like you're doing two jobs at the same time. There's not enough time to be able to do it. So when it actually comes to the point of, maybe you've been made redundant, or maybe you just cannot take where you work anymore and you're desperately trying to find a new role, it can feel quite daunting. It can feel quite overwhelming, and where do you turn and what do you do? So I completely understand it's not a straightforward thing, and a lot of the people that I'd be working with on a daily basis, share these stories about how they're feeling, and fortunately, I'm in a place where I can help them or give them some advice. But if not, there's probably some things that you can take away that even if you weren't talking to someone like myself or the like, that you can start reflecting on now. So in terms of the looking for next roles, the best place to start is always with your network. And what I mean by network is that could be people that you've worked with before. It could be that people through your personal network, your professional network. It could be through recruiters. But I think that's where you've got to start with your job search, because those people often, they know you, they know your capabilities, they know your personality. So it means that immediately you've got a head start on most other people who might be looking at, sorry, let me rephrase. Most other people, when they're actually going to a fully advertised job post, if you can actually be talking to people before jobs are even advertised, you're already ahead of the game. A lot of people feel like networking is something that they're either not good at, or they don't necessarily have the time to invest. And again, I do understand that it is tricky to sort of assign time when you're working incredibly hard to actually go out and meet people and talk to people. But building those relationships before you actually come to the point of needing a new role is just super critical, to be keeping your finger on the pulse, to make sure that you've got a really good idea about what might be happening in the broader industry. And also it just gives you an opportunity to get a constant pulse check on some of the work you're doing, what a next step could look like, any ongoing feedback that you might not otherwise get if you just start doing this process as soon as you're looking for a job. So that would be my first thing that I'd advise and encourage anybody to do is, reflect on who is in your network, and just make sure that you're actually catching up with these people, and maybe make it a little bit of a thing of catching up with someone, once a month, for example, someone in your network. So at least then you're having at least 12 different conversations with people that at some point you might actually need to lean on, but at the same time you might be able to help. And networking is very much a two-way thing. There's a couple of articles that I researched here that suggested, I think the number's quite high, but there was an article that I shared or read through Forbes magazine, which suggested that 80% of jobs are landed through networking. I think that number's probably a little bit higher than the reality, but maybe from their sources they see that as the accurate number. But I think what the point is that there's some great jobs that just don't actually come to job boards and don't even come to recruiters per se. And if you can make sure that you're in the traffic and actually having conversations with people proactively about potential opportunities on an ongoing basis, you can see why that number might be high in terms of people landing jobs through their network. The other piece as well is that what is job networking. So I've got an article here that I can share with you afterwards, which kind of gives you a bit of a 4 or 5 point plan about what it is. And ultimately, it's about building relationships, and it's not about building something that is one way where you need something from them or someone's taking something from you. It is very much centered around building relationships just to broaden your horizons, have interesting conversations. And whilst it might not have something right immediately as an end point, you'll find that it will surprise you when it might pay back, because you never know the value of your network until you're out of work. In terms of reaching out to recruiters, so I'll give you a bit of an inside tip here. So recruiters, or good recruiters anyway, always will invest in people and invest in relationships, again, before the time as well. If I think about the best people that I work with, it's people that I've known for many, many years. There's been times where I've helped them, there's been times where they've helped me, but as soon as something really interesting comes up, the people that have invested time in us as much as we've invested time in them, and at times it could be very much different sort of balance of 70-30, 80-20, that doesn't matter, but investing in the relationship. They're the people that we will always call first, as long as obviously the skill set aligns, but we'll always call first because they're front and center to us. So I think that reaching out to recruiters, again, try and do it before the time actually comes of I'm looking for my next role. It will also give you a good opportunity to get some valuable feedback, some ideas on your CV, gives you a few ideas about organizations that might be interesting, and if they're good, often ask some questions that you might not have considered beforehand. Job boards, they can be clearly very valuable if you use them correctly. So LinkedIn, Seek, etc. I think job boards can be interesting because sometimes when you start sort of typing in the roles that you're potentially interested in, you can actually start to build a bit of a picture as to whether the skills that you have are in demand at the moment because of the number of roles that are there. And it also gives you a bit of an idea as to whether the particular sectors, as we've just discussed before, whether there are sectors that are maybe demonstrating that they're hiring more than others. So job boards is a good place as well to gather information. The challenge with job boards, of course, when you're looking for roles, is that it can feel like a bit of a black hole at times, and not necessarily you don't necessarily get the content or the connection that you might find with a recruiter or a really capable internal recruiter, because you just don't necessarily hear back. You can't really get any data points as to how are you positioned against the other people in the market. How does your CV or your resume fit in terms of comparing you to others? And you might not even come out the other side because often there's a bit of more of a matching exercise of keywords and your position description. So that can be really tricky to actually kind of come out the other end against hundreds of other people. So job boards are clearly very, very important as part of the process. But I believe that the networking component and then reaching out to both external and really capable internal recruiters as well for particular organizations is probably a better place to start before trying to sort of really hit the job boards hard, because it can end up being sometimes a little demoralizing for what you get back. I'll just pause there for a moment, Nathan, again, just to see if there's any questions on that.
Yeah, I like that, Shaun. Really good insight. And anyone, please shoot through any questions on that. And I guess that particular topic, I'm a huge advocate for myself. And recently, just literally made a hire in a very similar fashion. So first things first, I will say that obviously when you've just been made, like, let's face it, a lot of what I love the line Shaun used. I'm actually literally about to post on LinkedIn. You never know the value of your network until you're out of work. Wow, such a powerful line. And obviously that involves a proactive approach. And I think we're all human, and sometimes we aren't as proactive as we'd like. But hopefully, through some of these redundancies, we can all become a little bit more proactive because we're not immune to being out of work. But from a reactive approach, something that worked for me recently, we put an ad up on Seek for a swag coordinator to join us here at Swag and Send, and someone come through on LinkedIn and messaged me personally. And it was the fact that I guess she stood out from the noise. It was a personalized email to me with a bit of insight into what her passions were, why Swag and Send, why she wanted to join. Obviously, just based on her reaching out to me, I was like, oh wow. And let's face it, I'll be honest, her background was definitely ticked a lot of boxes, but she was able to stand out from the noise, whereas normally I would have just waited a few days, gone through Seek. Okay, yep, I'll get to that person later. The fact that she come through there, I was like, oh my god, I need to talk to her ASAP. And we ended up hiring that person. So don't be afraid to go outside. I guess the traditional methods such as just applying. You need to stand out. So if that means going onto LinkedIn and reaching out to the recruiter, reaching out to the hiring manager, whoever it is, you basically want to try and put your best foot forward. So that's probably a reactive approach that I often do. Will often encourage candidates to do because I think it drives a lot of value. But hey, this is Shaun's session, so that was just a little bit of insight.
No, Nathan. Honestly, I think that's super valuable. I think you're absolutely right. If I receive a personalized message, or if I message someone else and it's personalized, the chances of that person coming back and you becoming memorable, which is ultimately what you want. You want to stand out from 50, 60, 70, 100 other people. I think it's a really valuable point.
it's just an effort thing, like it's just the effort. Like
Yeah.
if you think customer experience, customer service, we people buy people they like, and I think the same goes for jobs. People that like, oh wow, this person actually acknowledged me or went out the way to talk to me or tried extra hard. There's like just a human element where you're like, oh wow, you know what? Hang on, it's just human decency to get back to the person even if they're not right. So
Yeah.
good insight. Any other questions on that, guys? No, cool, awesome, Shaun. Sounds
Cool.
like it seems you're
Next.
covering all bases, which is fantastic. So let's move on to hunt with intent.
Okay, good. So obviously Orca being our name, we don't necessarily play on the Orca bit very often, but I think just for the purposes of this, it was relatively aligned with this part of the presentation. So I guess some practical steps to start with your job hunt. So for me, if you've been made redundant or you've fallen foul of a restructure, let's say that's the thing that we're discussing here today. In the most part, is that you've probably got an opportunity to sort of really reflect. You might not have been surprised. Sorry, you might not have been expecting the redundancy to be coming, or you might not have expected to let go. So you might just want to take a bit of time to reflect and work out what it is that you want to do next. And I think really taking that time to sort of invest in yourself and what you want to do next, I think is really important. And trying to work out for who as well. So I think really working out what are your values, what's really important to you. And if you get to the point of you think you've answered those questions, my advice is ask them to yourself again and try and go a layer deeper. Because I think when the push comes to the shove, what's actually really important to us can actually be quite different to what we think at a very conscious level of what's important. So that would be my first bit of advice, is really sort of spend some time, I don't know, get out a A3 sheet of paper and a pen and start drawing some things around what it is that you want to do next if you could, and for who. And then thinking about what your value proposition is. So in a market that at the moment, just with the way the whole economy is that it's probably slightly favoring the clients. In 2021, it was probably favoring the candidates because there was a glut of hiring and there was less people actually sort of available and looking. And even though there is still absolutely some real confidence and positivity in the market, there probably is just a slight imbalance in that there's more supply than there is demand. So really reflecting on your own value proposition. So what skills do you have? What experiences have you gained so far? And then what are your ambitions moving forward? Now, if you've really thought about what your value proposition is, the question that you then need to ask yourself is, well, does it actually align with the career aspirations that you have? Because just because you want to do something doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best person for that right now based on the experiences you have. And I'll use a really live example here at the moment, is that the topic of ESG and sustainability is one that lots and lots of people are really passionate about. I'm one of those. But because you're passionate about something doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that you can go and do unless you've maybe invested more time in getting yourself qualified and educated in that space. So what you might have to do is then focus on, well, what's something that could still get me towards that space, but potentially isn't actually that role, for example. And I think that that's where you just got to make sure that your alignments are and aspirations are realistic, because in a market where there's probably a few more candidates than there are roles, it does mean that you need to really focus on what you're good at and what you've done before, to really make sure that that sort of positions you in the right way against other probably very capable people as well in the market. If you've thought through, whether your career aspirations align with what your value proposition is, and we go down the yes path, then you really need to highlight that. And I think lots of people can talk to that. Some people need to practice that if they've been in a role for a long time and haven't looked for a new role. But every single aspect of what you're presenting needs to be what you're wanting to project onto the world and what you want to get back. And that's quite a broad sort of term, onto the world, but you need to put out there what you want to get back. So the things that are on your CV, the things that are on your LinkedIn, the things that you say when you meet someone and talk to people, it just really needs to be consistent and accurate with the things that you've actually done and the skills that you've actually got. If it doesn't, what you're trying to do with your career aspirations, well, you then need to map out, okay, so if I'm not going to get that from, let's say, it's obvious, and every job that I apply for, people are going to see that I've got that type of skill set. The best way goes back to the networking piece, is that if you haven't got those skills that are perfectly aligned, but there's probably some things that are transferable, then who else do you know in the space that you're trying to get into? Reflect back. First connections, second connections, third connections. People don't mind you asking, to see if there's connections that people can make. And often people will be happy to try and help. So working that part out about who's in that space is I think really valuable. Then trying to look at, well, what are the skills and experiences that you have that actually are transferable? Because the biggest frustration I've experienced from talking to candidates is that all they're looking to do, this is the client's feedback potentially, or the recruiter's feedback, is match that to that. And if you've not done it before in that particular sector and you can't tick off 99% of it, I'm not going to be considered. And that might be the case with some organizations and some recruiters or some people, but actually there's some really good people out there that will lift the hood of the bonnet and look underneath and work out, well, what are the skills that make you good at what you do, and what skills potentially link sectors, and what skills potentially link role types, and how would they transfer? So really reflecting on, from your perspective, what you think could be a transferable skill and highlighting that. And then also being open with yourself and honest with yourself about the things that you've got to build. Ask people about where your blind spots might be. Ask people about getting some feedback on where they think you might have gaps for the types of things that you're looking to do. Look at other people that are in the space and look at their backgrounds. You might be able to find out a particular experience that they've had, or a qualification that they've maybe acquired, that might allow you to go, oh, okay, if I want to get into that space, I probably need to get that or that potentially. And the last point around asking for feedback is that you can never ask for feedback enough, and don't be shy for asking for it, and don't be shy of saying to people that you want the good, the bad, and the otherwise, because ultimately, if it's constructive, it will only help you with trying to get to where you want to get to. I'll just pause there again, Nathan, and just any questions.
No, perfect. Awesome, guys. Again, floor's open for any questions based on that. I think hunt with intent is certainly it's, I guess, what you give is what you get. And I'm going to be honest with you, as a recruiter, this sounds terrible, but I can't help myself. Like, a lot of people complain about recruiters not getting back to you and stuff like that. But if, for example, we're advertising a software engineer role and a Boilermaker reaches out and tries to apply for that role, they are going to get an automated response, and it's not going to be personalized. It probably is going to take a week or two before they get that response, because there's obviously no basis for why they would want that role, why they're looking for that role, or something like that. Whereas if there was some intent there, as hey, I'm currently a Boilermaker, but I'm currently studying at a General Assembly or something like that, and I'm trying to break into this career path. It's like, okay, great, awesome, let's have a conversation. But there's no intent, or there's no, I guess, understanding on what they're trying to do. We can't read minds, so therefore we're often going to bypass that. So I think it's really important, with a lot of the stuff that Shaun said today. If you're trying to break into government and trying to break into different industries where there are a lot of roles, you're probably going to have to, this last section with hunting with intent is so important, because you're going to be up against people that are already in that field applying for the same roles. So you want to stand out as to why and what value can you bring to these new roles that perhaps someone in that role can't bring. So there's so many transferable skills from startups to corporates that we can take into government roles, any roles, to be honest. And again, being intentional with what they are and being intentional with what you can do makes a massive impact. So please, that was the last section, right, Shaun?
No, we've got one or two more.
Oh, fantastic! I just wasn't sure. That's all right. Awesome. Yeah. Any questions on that, guys? No, cool. All right, guys. Let's cool. Sure, we'll keep going with the next two.
5 do's and don'ts of job hunting. These are probably not all of the do's and all of the don'ts, but there are things here that you can probably just reflect on and just make sure that you do more of or do less of. So don't, as part of this whole process, deprioritize your well-being. I know that might sound something not necessarily related to a job hunt, but ultimately, healthy mind, healthy body will obviously mean that you're probably positioning yourself in the most positive way for, or presenting in the most positive way for your job hunt. So definitely don't deprioritize your well-being. Reaching out to ask, this is something that, ask ask for help, speak to people, share some of the things that you're struggling with. If you are struggling with something, be vulnerable, ask for someone to do you a favor. Like I said, if you've invested in them, then no doubt they'll be very happy to try and do what they can to help. So reach out to ask. Sorry, let me actually rephrase that. That's on the don't one. Sorry, when I said reaching out to ask, it's probably on both sides. Reach out to ask for help, but don't reach out to just ask for something when you've maybe not been in touch with someone for the last 2 years, and the first time that they hear from you is actually reaching out to ask for, hey, I'm now in the market, can you find me a job? That's quite a turn off. It's quite a turn off for people, quite a turn off for recruiters. Certainly reaching out to ask for help, when you've actually built that relationship is a good thing. Reaching out to just ask as and when you're looking for a job, it just feels very one-sided, very takey, and not that you've actually invested in the relationship. The don't neglect investing in your professional development. Really, really important. So make sure that you are attending things, events, seminars related to your career, your job hunt. Also, other things that you can maybe ask your employer to be doing that's actually in addition to the job that you're doing, that might help you land the next role internally or externally. Personal brand, really important. So that's everything that you project onto the world. So that is your LinkedIn. Make sure your picture's looking really strong. Make sure your intro is really purposeful. Make sure that all of the whole profile all the way through gives a really clear indicator of who you are and what you do. The same as your CV, and the same as how you present when you're actually talking to people face to face over VC. And don't also settle. Really interesting sort of perspective on this is that there might be people out there that they have to get the next job, for financial reasons, and I completely understand that. But if you have been made redundant, for example, and there's a little buffer in there in terms of redundancy, don't just settle for the first thing that comes through unless it's your perfect thing. There will be other opportunities out there, and if you are doing all of the other practical steps that we've discussed, it's quite likely that you're pointing yourself towards the types of things that not only you're good at, but that people are going to think that you're a good fit for. So you don't necessarily just need to settle for the first thing. All of the ticks are kind of the opposite of what we've got on the crosses there. So definitely invest in yourself. Make your networking business as usual. Thread it into your monthly, modus operandi to make sure that you are doing it on a proactive basis. Be thoughtful and strategic about your career. It's often not going to be something that just will come to you and you can't wait for it to happen. There are some wonderful leaders out there who will absolutely spend time working out how they can invest in your career and take the next steps and kind of navigate that. But ultimately, they're few and far between. So just be strategic and proactive about your career and how you're forging your path. Skills and achievements, making sure that personal brand is really front and center and always up to date, and finding the right role. Actually spend some time really focusing on the right role rather than just settling for the first thing that comes up, unless of course with that caveat that maybe you have to because of certain financial sort of restrictions. But I think most people are always going to be okay for a month or two potentially, and that way then I still think it gives you enough time to find that right opportunity. I'll just pause there for a moment, Nathan.
No, awesome. And I think that, I think this section is pretty straightforward. Guys, any questions, please reach out, as always. But yeah, I think exactly. I think, again, it comes back to what I was saying before, what you give is what you get. A nice sharp profile photo does go a long way. It's like when you meet someone, right? You sort of, I hate to say it, there is an unconscious bias to be, judgmental. It's the same thing with profile photos, on LinkedIn, or just, the story on LinkedIn. It's like where there's effort, there's a way. So, people are always looking for people that go above and beyond. So, I think I feel like the 5 do's and don'ts of job hunting are, a great reminder, but hopefully everyone's sort of watching this is sort of on top of that. Any other questions, guys? Cool. All right, let's move into the next section.
Okay, so I'm sure everybody has an opinion, and I'm sure you've been given many an opinion on about what a perfect CV might look like in terms of length and content. So I am just going to share my own personal view, and I'm sure there'll be another 100 people out there that will have a different perspective. But there's research out there that suggests that your CV is skimmed by a recruiter or a hiring manager somewhere between 6.25 and 30 seconds. Now, it's not a long time to be able to showcase all of the skills, all of the experiences, and some of the great work that you've done, which probably then means that if you've got a short period of time to really demonstrate your value and what you're good at, it probably means that you really need to focus on the first page that lands in someone's desk, and make sure that that absolutely talks to everything that we've discussed before around what you're trying to project for the roles that you want, the type of work that you think that you can do, the skills that you bring, and the achievements that you've had. So I think focusing on this first page for me is critical. Personalize it. So I think that you're putting yourself first and foremost, and sort of first impressions matter tested. These are the things we're going to go through. So the first page for me is something that having some sort of an executive summary, or sort of just a profile summary as a paragraph, a few lines, 3, 4, 5, 6, just introducing who you are and personalizing it a little bit, about the type of colleague, the type of executive, the type of person that you are is really critical. And then I think the next part for me is probably something that, rather than diving straight into your jobs, dates, times, roles, etc., I think there's a real opportunity to enhance that first bit by actually thinking about, well, when I reflect on my skills and the competencies that I possess, what are they, and how does that align to the types of roles that I'm going for? Because if you can pick out those key competencies, and then you can really thread through underneath that an opportunity to sell yourself around the things that you've done that are absolutely key, but within those competencies, in particular in previous roles that you've done, I think it gives you a really real opportunity to sort of hit someone in the face with, this is what someone is going to get if they appoint you into their role in the first instance. And I just think it's incredibly powerful before you start diving into roles, timelines, organizations, etc. So if, for example, delivering large scale transformation is your thing, or if it's around aspects to do with data or technology or HR, there's going to be things that you need to be successful in that role, and skills that you've got that enable you to do that. And there's going to be things that you've done that would then support those competencies. And I think if you can really lay those out very, very clearly, that 6 to 30-second test that's suggested, I think it just makes it very, very simple to see the type of person you are and the value that you're going to bring to an organization. So for me, that's absolutely critical. The rest of your CV, means that if you've kind of taken some of those really key points and put that into your first page, it means that you probably don't need to repeat all of that again throughout your CV. Now, I don't think that a CV, even as someone with 20, 30 years experience, needs to go over 4 pages. I think that anything between 1 and 4 is fine, depending on the function and the role that you're in. But I think just reflect on things like impact, things like, is it aligned to what you want to put out there into the world? And I think that impact, gravitas, conciseness, that's the sort of stuff that people are going to see if you've got a really sort of well-written resume. The first impressions matter as well. And when I talk about first impressions, is that if someone presents me with what looks like just a knocked up Word document that they've put together, on a Sunday night and just kind of sent it across, and it's just very, very, very basic, whilst that person can be brilliant, it does just say a little bit about something, because that document is basically you putting out there everything that you want people to know you for. So I think that having a document that is aesthetically pleasing, something that does look like you've really put some thought into it, you don't need to overcomplicate it, but it looks like you've put some thought into it, and it looks like you've taken pride in what you're going to send out. Immediately, for me, it does give me a first impression even before I've spoken to the person, and makes me think, this person is serious, this person clearly knows what they're trying to do, and it's quite likely that that person is going to be a good candidate. Now, that is not a rule of thumb in terms of it doesn't always work, but I think that putting that out there just shows the right first impressions and the right intent. And then certainly for someone like me, I'll look upon that quite favorably, and then test it. Now, like I said, you'll get 100 different views from lots of different people, but just try and capture, maybe some key things that people are saying. Don't try and chop and change too much. But I think if you sort of go with those 1 or 2 points that I've mentioned, any good recruiter, I think, will probably say something relatively similar, and it hopefully should set you up for a really good document that has impact when it lands on someone's desk. I'll just pause there.
Good insight, Shaun.
And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Shaun. Really, really good insight in that last bit. And maybe I'll sound like a terrible recruiter if I say this, but you say six seconds to about 30. I think me personally and some other stats out there relay about 3 seconds to about 9. And I know from the experience that I can literally probably scan a CV in 3 seconds and be moving on. And that's why short, sharp, succinct, is when I say moving on, obviously to make sure, okay, is there intent there? Are we on the same page? Are we matched with what the role we've got on what this person's looking for? And when I say 3 seconds, that's 3 seconds before I'm going to continue reading. So it's almost like okay, yep, are we on the same page? Bang, yes we are. Okay, then comes the 30-second read. And I'm not sure, I may have just mentioned this all, but one thing I would say as well is don't be afraid to have two CVs. I think that you might want to tailor up a little bit. It could be slightly different. Like for example, from a recruitment perspective, if you're going for a recruitment role, that specializes in sales, feel free to edit that with some of your sales focus and some of the roles you're recruited for from a sales focus. Or if you're in recruitment and going for a role that's more general, maybe have a more generic focus. And if you have to go third, if you're looking for a leadership position or you're looking to step up, again, tailor your CV to something like that. So don't be afraid to have more than one CV that's slightly different to what you're sort of looking for, that's more in line with the roles you're looking for.
I think just to build on that, by the way, I think it's a really good point, Nathan, but I think to build on that, it also can depend on where you're at in your career journey. If you're someone who is sort of in the earlier part of their career and you're still delivering and you're still a little bit more technical, then obviously that's the sort of stuff that you want to, project and be really, really clear on in that sort of opening page. If you're actually a leader, and you're someone who's sort of building their career as a leader, as an executive, then people are less interested in technically what you've done, and it's more about some of the things that you've delivered at a much higher level. So I think that is probably something that I would say, depending on the seniority of the person, would depend on how much it's focused on detail and execution versus sort of higher level things that are a bit more strategic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I 100%, I totally agree. And I think you're right. If you're more in a deliverable role, you want to see get some wins on the board. So it's probably a little bit harder to be able to add anything to that. And if you do too early, you can probably do yourself a disservice. Whereas I guess, from speaking from a leadership perspective, you can play with that a little bit more. Michael's got a question for you, Shaun. So how important are keyword inclusions in your CV to ensure scanning software does not exclude your application before it even gets to a recruiter?
Michael, I'd have to say I'm really sorry, mate, but I'm probably not the best person to ask about this because we don't use any scanning software when we actually sort of go through applications. It's all manual and we're sifting through each of them. I don't know, Nathan, if you've got any perspective on that, if you've kind of used software to scan sort of profiles previously or applications previously.
I'm glad you said that. No, and Michael, to be honest, I'm not sure if this is something more common in the US, but I can hand on heart say in the 4 or 5 teams I've led from a global perspective, we have never ever had any software that scans out CVs before we before we send them to to the hiring manager. But let me give you some insight into why sometimes you might not why people don't get back to you. So what could generally happen is that we'll go through CVs. Let's say we've got 100 CVs. I could go start scanning through those CVs, taking my time going, yep, okay, thanks, shortlist, no, not right. So no, not right goes into a rejection pile to be able to send out a bulk email. So it's yes, no, yes, no. Then I concentrate on yes. And once I've sort of concentrated on yes, I will then speak to those candidates and decide who I'm going to put forward to my hiring manager. Now, what can often happen is if I've only looked at 3 or say 10 to 15 CVs, and I've got 3 or 4 solid candidates, I'm going to start moving to my hiring manager now, and I'm probably going to stop at 15 CVs and move on to another role. Because you've got to remember, a recruiter could be working on 10 to, anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 roles at any one time, depending on how much coverage they've got. So if I've stopped at 15 and start having my hiring managers review those CVs, and all of a sudden say yes to 3 interviews, I'm like, okay, great. We've got 3 people going to first stage interview. That's a positive. I know that generally, based on my statistics, that if I have 3 going to CV, 3 going to interview, I know I'm going to close. I've got a 36 or 38% chance of closing one, and therefore I'll go through the process with them. And if all of a sudden somebody gets the role, I'm likely to be like, okay, great, so someone's got the role now. And those 75 that did apply, generally sometimes going to miss out. So generally, we'll obviously keep trying to go through those 75 where we can. But sometimes we can be so lucky where we have 5, 6, 7, 8 candidates, that look fantastic. Doesn't happen very often. We probably only get 3, 4 in 100. But it's just a numbers game. So again, if every recruiter only worked on 1 or 2 roles, it would be great to be able to go through all 100, or as they come through every day and say, okay, here's more. But unfortunately, you would probably get to a stage where you actually never get to close the process down because you've got so many CVs. So hopefully that gives you a bit more insight. But yeah,
Nathan, I reckon
sure.
Just to build on that though, because like now I've thought about it, which I think is quite interesting as well, Michael, is that you can definitely weave keywords into your CV. I think that can be, without it sort of being completely obvious. But I think now we're moving into, and this might be the point of your question as well, around the whole use of automation and technology, the chat GPT kind of overlays of trying to sort of remove certain aspects that are manual and sort of automate. I think it's definitely something that will probably be of consideration more so and more so sort of moving forward, because it's quite likely if organizations who do high volume recruitment have a ridiculous high volume of roles, rather than the recruiter having to try and match maybe sometimes some keywords to some the job descriptions, maybe it will just be done by something like an automation tool. So I think it's super interesting. I think if you can maybe weave it in without it being super obvious, so it doesn't kind of take away from some of the things that you're positioning, I think it's absolutely worthwhile keeping in there. And I think it'd be interesting to see over the next few years whether that's something that becomes more and more of a challenge and more at the forefront when people are scanning sort of significant amounts of CVs for roles.
Good insight. And to add to my point, Michael, like there's a Slack channel with about 900 recruiters, internal recruiters in Australia on there, and I am so certain that I'm going to actually check after this, but I'm so certain that 80-90% of those would not be using this sort of software. But more to Michael's point, maybe it's just the background we've come from, or me particularly, more startups than scale ups. So we don't have the luxury of having hundreds of applications come our way. If we're hiring a software engineer, we'd probably get 5, 10, 15, if that. And most of the time, we're probably going to have to go source because it's not the right one. So maybe that's our line of work, but maybe in government and some other industries, that could be a little bit more right. But I haven't come across it yet, and I don't think it's as common as we think. Jeremy, I have a really strong opinion on this, but I'll let Shaun answer it first. So Jeremy, what advice do you have regarding cover letter length, etc.?
Cover letters are really interesting. I think that some particularly senior roles, some searches I've seen them, like universities that I recruit for example, will absolutely say that a cover letter needs to be in support of a CV. I think cover letters can be like an entire wall of text that is really hard to kind of actually spend some time reading through and drawing out some information of what's actually relevant. So I would say that cover letters can be good to give maybe an overview of more of a technical document, that is your CV. But I think that no more than a page, in my opinion. And I think that just really being conscious that you just don't want an entire wall of text that comes through that isn't actually going to be probably read in great detail, because it's just too much if that's replicated 10, 15, 20, 30 times over to go through everything and actually kind of absorb some of the information that's on there. Just my opinion.
Can you hear me? Yep. Good insight. My opinion on this matter is slightly different. I think that cover letters have a place for leadership roles, even VP. However, I'm not a fan of cover letters at all. I feel that your CV is enough to demonstrate what you've done. And hear me out. Why I don't like cover letters, I feel, is it's another document to fill in to potentially give a recruiter unconscious biases. So all of a sudden, I've looked at your CV. I'm like, oh, hey, great, looks good. If I go into another document and start reading things that's potentially, oh, well, hang on, I haven't done that, or I haven't done this, or oh, no, we don't need that. All of a sudden, it gives me another bias. And any great recruiter or any great company hiring at the moment is trying to minimize as many biases as possible. So I always just wrote a post on LinkedIn the other day about this. A CV should basically demonstrate your capability and give an overview that you're right for the role. And it should be up to the hiring manager, the recruiter and the hiring manager to have a conversation with you, because a conversation is a two-way street. Recruitment and interviews are a two-way street. It's an opportunity for you to find out if the role's right for you. It's an opportunity to find out if we're right for you, and so on. And I always say I think it's really important that candidates treated that way. So I'm basically a firm no on cover letters up until senior leadership positions, where I think you might want to obviously articulate how you may have built a team out, where the revenue was prior to building a team out, what it looks like now, and stuff like that, where you need a bit more context. But back to Shaun's point and my point a little bit earlier, is Shaun's a lot more patient than I am in spending 30 seconds on a CV. A cover letter with a block of text like Shaun mentioned could take another minute, and it's almost like, oh no. So it almost slows us down, and it can be and again adds biases. So hope that gives you a bit more insight, Jeremy, or feel free to ask a little bit more on that, or any other questions. Cool, awesome. Shaun, thank you so much for taking the time out. It's been a wealth of information. Everyone that sort of joined today and listened, we will get a post of the recording and actually put this on the Striven site on the LinkedIn page. So you can obviously review that and have a look at that and go through anything again. Please feel free to reach out to Shaun directly. I'm sure I say that without even asking his permission. I'm sure he'll be more than okay with it to answer any follow-up questions. Feel free to answer. Feel free to reach out to me directly, or more importantly, the Striving community as well. But thank you all for joining and taking the time out, and look forward to the next session, which will be there soon, guys.
Thanks, Nathan.
Awesome. Enjoy
Thanks,
the rest
guys.
of your day, everybody. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.